Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well. Ready and raring to go.
Yeah.
And it's not even Monday. It's Tuesday or Wednesday. Who knows?
One of those days.
But anyway, our business is never ending if we're checking up on trying to sort out facts from fiction.
Yeah.
But that's been around for a long time, historically speaking. But once again, we want to talk about Europe and the problems that the Europeans are having with the Russians. The Russians don't like the Europeans, and they're getting ready to fight. But we want to talk about the expansion of what's happening in Europe. But it is, in a way, is shocking to know how many troops we still have in Europe when there was that hope with the breakdown of the Cold War.
Yeah.
That what do we need to be over there? There are arguments against being over there even when the Soviet system was strong. What's the reason for being there? And the Russians won't leave Berlin unless we promise to do that, and we won't antagonize, and we won't do anything. But nevertheless, all this stuff proceeds, and it's in the interest of some people, for various reasons, to continue the build-up, militarily speaking. So there's, in recent months or year, it's expanded to up to 100,000 troops.
Yeah.
In this day and age, the truth is, if you really wanted to defend a country and you had a few specialized modern weapons, and when they can target people, on a sidewalk, it's a mixed blessing on there. But you don't need 100,000 people to get rid of a bad guy if the bad guy is really the problem that they have. So now they're talking about sending more troops, but they've changed the wording. Those 100,000 and what's been going on since 1980, 1990 has been. This is just temporary. Temporary. They want to make it put up front and give people military security and financial security. Those on the receiving end. We want to make these permanent bases because that way we'll have permanent peace.
Yeah. Well, this is the best thing that's ever happened to NATO since the end of the Cold War. This conflict in Europe, and we should and NATO and the military-industrial complex. I mean, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to them. They were floundering around for years looking for a purpose, and now they have it. They're going to fight Cold War and maybe Hot War 2.0. NATO's been training and equipping the Ukrainian military for 8 years. They've been teaching them how to fight Russia and kill Russians for 8 years. And when finally the war breaks out, it's a self-serving kind of situation for them because now they can say, aha, so they've been goading Russia on for these 8 years. And now when they finally get what they've wanted all along, they're thrilled. And let's do that second clip. I transposed it to. This is from military.com. This is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Milley, who our friend Doug McGregor says is one of the most woke generals we've ever had. New permanent Europe bases should be built to host rotational troops, Joint Chiefs Chairman says. More new bases, and not just in Europe, Dr. Paul, but let's go to that first clip that I messed it up. Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states are, quote, very, very willing to work with the U.S. to establish such bases and could take on the cost of construction, Milley told House lawmakers during testimony to the House Armed Services Committee. Quote, they'll build them, they'll pay for them, he said about how U.S. presence could change amid global alarm after Russia launched its unprovoked war in February. When I first read that, Dr. Paul, my first reaction, that reminds me of all the neocons before Iraq saying, this war is going to pay for itself. Remember, in fact, we're going to make a profit off it. The idea that the dirt poor Poles, and relatively speaking, and Baltics are going to ramp up, build a bunch of bases on the border with Russia, because this isn't just Europe, this is the border of Russia, build a bunch of bases, pay for them and maintain them themselves out of their own budget. I believe that you can sell me a bridge between Lake Jackson and Clute, right?
I think you're onto something, because I think it's a fact that you talk about that this is a good excuse for the job is to get rid of NATO and get rid of what's going on over there, but they don't expect that all of a sudden that's going to happen. But the way it happens is traditional. Countries that feel that they are king of the hill, they never last forever. Sometimes they last way too long. But in recent history, they're lasting for shorter periods of time. They don't last as long as the Roman Empire lasted, that sort of thing. So now they're rushing this through. So if they do this, 100,000 troops, then they don't have any money in the bank. And they already have, I think, the taxing authorities working very hard. But the real taxing authority is the people who just print the money and create the credit. So that's just going to usher on more sooner this whole thing of the crack-up boom and, the destruction of the economy. So indirectly, this may be helpful. Somebody say, oh, that's terrible, you're wishing for bad things. But the truth is, if we left for any particular reason from Europe, I don't think that would be bad. But what they would say is, oh yes, but it's going to make us poorer, because we won't have an excuse to build these weapons and do all this thing. But the whole thing is the two reasons why most empires do, they spread themselves too thinly around the world and want the empire to continue to grow, and they pay for it through fake money. And I would say we have a little bit of that going on.
Yeah, if only more Americans or most Americans would understand that this whole conflict over there right now is not in any way, shape, or form related to the U.S. national interest. The media and the government in every single conflict paints it as the new Hitler versus the free world, the new Stalin versus the free world. If we fail in our endeavor to defend democracy in Ukraine, another domino will fall. It's always the same story. It sells fairly well. Today with the social media, there is some pushback. Of course, then you get canceled. But Americans should understand that the borders of Ukraine are absolutely inconsequential to our well-being, to our security, to our safety. In fact, going over there and defending their borders instead of our own actually makes us much more vulnerable, because we're that much closer to a full-blown nuclear war over something that is absolutely unimportant to us.
Yeah, the principle of open borders, that is, it's not so much it's open because we are, really principled, loving people that want to help somebody in trouble. It's the whole thing is it's so costly. It's so costly to the American taxpayer. It's an invasion. I see it as a property issue. We have collectivized property, but when illegals come in, it really is a violation. Whether it's a government-paid, taxpayer-paid hospitals and schools and parks and everything else, then they come in here, and if they can't get a good place to put up their tent, they do it in downtown
Portland.
San Francisco. Yeah. And so there's always a cost there, and that is something that will be realized. They can't reverse the cost. Yeah. You can delay it, you can play games, you can punish some people over other people. There's lots of things that they will try, but you cannot stop the payment. The payment always has to be paid one way or the other. Sometimes it's fairly done because the people who had benefited tremendously will have to pay the bill. Unfortunately, you can be darn sure the poor and the middle class will be the biggest group of people in numbers that will suffer the most.
Yeah, and we're already doing it when we have to go get gas. Well, we got a piece by David Stockman on ronpaulinstitute.org, which is a great piece, and I recommend people read it. He talks about it all starts with the number 813 billion. That's the Biden defense budget, which I'm sure Congress is going to hike up. So it's all about this. It's all about robbing the middle and working class in the U.S. In favor of the elites. This is the second topic, but it's related because it's Milley again. Let's put on that next one. This is the same thing of him before Congress. And he says, top U.S. military officer, Ukraine conflict will likely last years. It's almost as if he's rubbing his hands together. Yeah. Yes, thankfully, finally. He believes this is going to be a very protracted war. It will last for years. This is the guy, of course, who's been wrong about everything. He was wrong about our departure from Afghanistan. He's like the Bill Kristol of the military, right?
Right.
Every time he says something, the opposite is true.
But don't you have to agree? He's still, unfortunately, in the system. He still has clout.
Yeah, he does.
It's routinely reported. It's never a qualification. That he is the final. Sort of like he's a military Fauci.
Yeah, military Fauci.
Yeah. So, but this whole idea. You bring up the word defense, and we use it as the DoD on defense appropriation. But that, I don't know what year they did it. But it really was a smart move on their part, the military-industrial complex, because doesn't it sound a little bit friendlier if people have to sacrifice to have defense?
Yeah.
Don't let the Russians come in and don't let us get bombed and all these things, and yet it's. There was a time at the beginning of our history, it was called the War Department.
Yeah.
If you were to put money in there and you weren't supposed to even have a standing army, I guess they think, where are you guys coming from?
Yeah.
But I would suggest that when this one totally fails, why don't you try it once again about not having a standing army and try having a way of not paying for things with debt and inflation. That would change things altogether, because this is accelerating in an exponential manner, and that's why well, how could anybody have said that QE is a dangerous thing to do? Well, QE was the most absurd monetary policy. People now are saying, well, the Marxists in Congress, they want this modern monetary theory.
Yeah.
Well, we've been doing it for a long time, and it's gotten worse, and they wanted to make it even worse. Just produce the money, and that's going to take care of it. But it will eventually have to come down. And I think if people realize all debt will be paid when it gets too large, and because you can't pay it back, or you can't pay the interest. Well, there's no interest in a way. There's no interest. There is, because interest is worked into the cost of things right now. So there is always a cost when you live beyond our means.
Yeah.
So to me it boils down to a moral issue that most people should realize they don't have a right to live beyond their means if they're taking what they need from somebody else with a gun.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a bad criminal is doing that. No, that's government.
Yeah.
That's what government does, because they knock on your door if you don't pay up for the military. Some people tried to strike in the 60s. They tried to strike the military part of their taxing, and say, I don't want any of my money going to the war.
Yeah.
But that didn't work. It was the disgust of the people and the death numbers that finally said enough is enough. Declare victory and leave. Yeah, some victory.
Yeah. Well, Milley says it's going to take years. It's going to last years. The war's going to last. You almost, again, there's a sense of glee. But, the people that we listen to, the military experts that we listen to, the actually successful ones, people like Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor and others, they have consistently said this war was essentially over from the first couple of days, when the air superiority was gained by the Russians right away. And we see that now. We had and David Stockman writes about it too. We had that 40-mile stretch of Russian military right outside of Kiev that was never hit that entire time. That means you have no control of the skies. And in fact, Carl Quintanilla of NBC News tweeted this earlier today. If you could do that bonus clip. And I have not checked these numbers. I'm assuming that he knows what he's talking about. He's been an anchor with NBC News. That bonus clip, if we can. It's from Funstrat. Our data science team has been tracking the casualties and losses associated with the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine has lost 1,969 tanks, or 91% of its equipment. The armament of that army is rapidly depleting. I am not sure if this is a well-known fact. And if you look at that chart, you can see 100% of helicopters, UAVs, 100% lost, 95, 91 tanks, air defense system, 56% gone. I don't know these numbers, but if you look at an army like that, you're not talking about years. And I'm sure that the General Milley is very depressed about that, but you're actually talking about days. And and in fact, the Washington Post, if I have it here, of all places, put out an article that was fascinating because they, just call it up, Dr. Paul. I had it queued here, but I'm halfway blind. Washington Post, of all places, okay, and this is via antiwar.com, they put out an article. The Washington Post reports that some NATO states prefer that Ukrainians continue fighting and dying over a peace that comes too early. Now that, if it's not cynical and sick, and I would guess is Poland and the Baltics, they are pushing, and the UK and the US, they're pushing Ukraine to keep fighting, although it's very, very obvious that the war is lost, so more people will die, more infrastructure will be destroyed, more civilians will be killed. They're pushing them to continue doing this when the smart move is to find a way to negotiate and make peace, whether through the Chinese, the Turks, or somewhere else, try to find a way to end this. This is a hopeless war.
And you'd think there would be more resistance in Europe, Eastern Europe, but they're cooperating pretty much. And once again, what I see as the greatest tool they have is the warmongering media. You know,
Yeah.
They're able to stir up that trouble. They either get people terrified and fearful that they have to go along with this, and they have to believe things that aren't true, and they do. There is support, even when the support starts and it's significant. Just like there was a resistance toward COVID, it was building. It was building a long time. It finally overwhelmed, but it wasn't fairly reported. So the people really didn't have much of a chance. That's what happens on these things. It's emotion. They see all the things that are happening there, and then it's twisted around and saying, well, the Russians are going to overtake, and we need to send more money and more tanks, and they continue to process. But all the wars that I've sort of paid more attention to, they always have to have a monster out there to destroy. If you don't have one, you got to create one.
Yeah, and I guess the Czechs are sending in a couple of dozen Soviet-era tanks. That's going to help a lot. First of all the fuel stores have been destroyed. There's no fuel, there's no spare parts, and they're basically giving them free, here, have a free death trap. This ought to be fun. Really, it's sick. Well, let's move on a little bit, because a little bit on COVID here. This is something from our friends over at the Defender, RFK Jr.'s outfit. 70% of COVID cases among CDC employees in August of 2021 were vaccinated employees, and this is obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request that has the data.
You know, I'm not surprised, but I was still, I was still shook up. I better read that twice. Yeah. You know, we've been saying that it isn't effective and it's all a con game. But even when I saw that, I thought, well, this must be some right-wing extremist doing this. But now it's coming out that they literally. People who work for the people who were supposed to give us the best advice, are ending up, and they were obedient. They got their shots, and they still, 70% of them got it. But they said, well, they just didn't get enough. They need, what were we talking about last week? Third, fourth, and fifth, maybe. Yeah. Keep it going, So that's the problem. They fib a little bit.
And now to be completely transparent, we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. We're simply talking about the percentage, because the numbers that came out from the FOIA request, August of 2021, the number of positive reports were 36 people from the CDC got COVID in that month. 25 of them were breakthrough cases, meaning the ultra rare breakthrough cases, meaning that they had been vaccinated and still got it. So that's where the 70% comes from. So we don't want to mislead people into thinking it's hundreds of people, but nevertheless, this wasn't supposed to happen. Walensky herself, remember, she said, these shots are like 90% effective. You're not going to get COVID if you get it. Well, even her own employees, unfortunately, found out the hard way.
But the response should be from a scientist, say, well, yes, this is a smaller number, but it has to have some significance. It's an indication we should be testing more and finding out. And they do suggest the different things that should be done to learn more about this, because that of course, is important, but they don't course, you can get into trouble if you talk about science, you know, unless you get it approved by somebody. So, unless Fauci approves it.
Yeah. So I guess we'll move on to our last little topic here, New York City, or did you have some more on the
No,
COVID?
I was just looking at the vaccine adverse reporting
Oh, yeah.
system that it's run by the FDA and CDC.
Yeah, yeah.
And even they came up with some statistics that that we should look at. I guess it had to do with that COVID stuff, but it isn't like it's not the enemy that's
Yeah.
doing that, or their challengers.
Yeah.
But anyway, it gives it more credibility. But Walensky got involved in that a little bit too, and she was in disagreement with this because somebody said that that these COVID jabs are the most dangerous vaccination that were ever created. And she said she disagreed with that. And she really didn't know much about the study, but that's what the people that were studying, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration,
Yeah.
but it's still the point that it isn't just a couple. It may be a small number, but it's just not a couple people who have already been labeled and they'll never recover from the destruction of their character and their credibility.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
okay.
Well, let's move on to New York City, and this is a story that that resonates on a number of levels. And put on that next clip. New York City mom who confronted Mayor Adams over toddler masking. This is kind of a follow-up from your comment yesterday. She confronted the mayor over the toddler masking, was fired by the city the same day. She worked for the city. I think if she was an attorney, and it was a press conference, and she said, "Hey, Mayor, you said you're gonna free the kids. You're not gonna make them put a mask on. And in the last second, you had a panic attack, and you came in and you broke your word. What's up with that?"
And her point was that he pointed out to you, you said this on April 4th, the toddlers who aren't really threatened at all, most scientists now will agree with that, they're going to have to wear a mask. So in a way, she was just implying, I don't even know if she used the word, but he was flat out lying to her. You know, so he changed his tune and all. But when this happened and she confronted him, this thing was they said within an hour she was fired, and it was the same day that she was fired. But their excuse was, oh no, she was already suspended, and she was already accused of being a liar. She claimed that she was a journalist. So I got to thinking, why don't we compare the authenticity of who's reaching the truth? The person that's looking for information, in this day and age, everybody's a journalist.
Yeah.
They should be anyway.
Yeah.
So she wants the journalist. She says, she told a lie, so we have to get rid of her. But how does that compare to the lies told by the CDC, by the Faucis of the world, and by this mayor himself?
Yeah.
And then they claim that she's the bad person, and she told a much more wicked lie, and yet she approaches the truth much better than the rest of them.
I would encourage, and we found this on Zero Hedge, I would encourage people to go to this article. I think it came out yesterday. Watch the press conference, watch the look on the mayor's face. And of course, this is subjective, but in my opinion, the look on his face was one of pure hatred when she dared to challenge him on this issue. He was furious. Ironically, and it's a little bit funny, the event that the mayor was at was a LGBT whatever event, and the banner on the podium where he stood was, "Come to the city where you can say whatever you want." And here goes this poor old mom saying what she wanted, and boom, you're out of there. You're on the street.
This woman was a government employee. She worked in the Justice Department, and she's been off for time with her, having a baby, and she was. She was then saying she was going to. That was when she argued that she was a journalist. But according to the spokesman, the decision of Chapel and her decision to lie and say she's a journalist caused them to do it. Well, that's like I said, that's just a far stretch of what's going on, you know.
So they don't like being challenged, that's for sure.
Yeah, that is true, and they don't. That's back to this thing at the very beginning. We said we got more mileage when we could get a picture. And it would be recent. It wasn't like 20 years ago they said something. Last week they said something, or in the same speech.
Yeah.
And then they'd flip over and say something else. People responded favorably. Rather, that was information that helps them be suspicious of what's really going on.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of short things to close out, if you're ready.
Okay.
First of all, this is just kind of a little fun fact aside, and you asked me about this morning. You didn't know I was going to put it up. But put up that next article. It's from Politico, that next clip. I love the cover. It's an animated cover. It's a GIF. But Ron Paul's Revenge. It's a very long article in Politico. Our friend Jeff Dice sent it to me, and he said, if you can ignore a lot of the snark that's in the article, there's actually a lot of good stuff in there about how you've influenced the crypto community. The subtitle is, His Political Revolution Sputtered, Then His Disciples Found Cryptocurrency. Now they want to force Washington to finally grapple with his strange ideas.
Yeah. The author was an investor in crypto. And, you know, I think a lot of people know where I stand on it, but it is not exactly something. There's a lot of people who can come down one area. They're either strong crypto, strong gold, or strong both. And mine is... It makes me think about how I answer the questions about are you the guy that wanted to legalize marijuana for so long?
Yeah.
I said, no, I never wanted to legalize marijuana. I never got up there and said it. I wanted to legalize freedom, which is a big difference. And you get to make your choices, and then you decide whether it's good or bad for you. Same way with the crypto too. You know, of course, I'm very sympathetic for the legalization. I had all these bills in for competition. So people who understand that and buy crypto, just because I don't absolutely agree and put every nickel I have into buying crypto, they still understand the position of what freedom is all about, and we're looking for a free society to solve our problems. You know, all kinds of problems, medical problems or whatever. And we let the people decide that. And this is a big difference from assuming that only the government can do it. And they said, well, yeah, but you can't do it with money. They've been government monopolies have been like that for years. And of course, that's why the principle of competition. But there's a lot of things to iron out on these things, because you have to have a system of laws, because the contract would be important. You can't just say this thing's worth $5 million like the government does. That's the fraud I can't stand. So it's something, but competition is still, because that's what happens when the economy collapses. Because the market, you know, finds something to be used for transaction, which took thousands of years to find, and that's why gold and silver was used. They used it as a substitute because you can't. It's hard to measure cows and pigs and exchange them. You have to have something to measure it by. You have to have a unit of account. So that's the important thing. But I was satisfied with their article because they might have made some fun. But they didn't decide that he was a kooky gold standard guy. In a way, there's a lot more people thinking along the lines, there is a substitute. And you mean that it's a possibility that free market money could work? Yeah, that's where it all goes when this falls apart. It might not last, but eventually it crashes down, people find substitutes, then the government decides to set up a new standard. And when you think about it, we're on our third effort for this, because we did it after the Continental money collapsed, and we did it after the Civil War and the greenbacks collapsed, and we went back to gold. So this, and right now we're going to leave paper, because more and more people, I'm very impressed on how much attention is given to the weakening respect the dollar has on international markets as a world reserve currency. So exciting times ahead, but risky.
Risky. Well, we definitely admire the spirit of a lot of our friends that are in the crypto community. By the way, at the Ron Paul Institute, we happily take Bitcoin. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org. We love and value your donations, your contributions in Bitcoin, whether anonymously or however. The last thing, Dr. Paul, is probably as we speak, our Ron Paul Institute representative is signing the contract with the hotel June 4th in Houston, downtown Houston. It's going to be a great conference. We'll start announcing speakers in the next few days, but it's going to be a great little event. Very timely. We're talking about the massive geopolitical shifts that we're witnessing as we speak. So mark it down on your calendars. I promised an update yesterday. I wasn't able to finish it, but I will finish it today and send it out. And we look forward to seeing as many of you there as can make it.
Well, I'd sure like to attend that conference.
Yeah, we'll let you in. We'll let
You'll let me come in.
We'll even give you a sandwich.
I want my discount. Yeah, so, very well. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today, because we depend on you for the support, because the emotional and psychological support that we get by saying, you know, this is a good program, I've learned something from it, and continue to do what you're doing. And we understand the position you have, that you're seeking truth, you do your very best. No one person has been known to know every single thing that is the absolute truth. But there's a big difference between seeking truth and always insisting in moving in that direction versus the nihilists and say, truth is impossible, we don't want to mess around with that. And then we end up with a system of government and a system of world politics like we have today, because there's a lot of people that resent and are very hateful to people who seek truth, and then come back philosophical and say, well, you're dealing with something you can't know. You can't know truth, but you can know if you're moving toward telling the truth, and you can sure tell the difference in journalism. You can tell when a true journalist is out there reporting, and that, of course, is what we look for, to rely on the information they give. And there's more of them, more out there than we realize. So many of them have been silenced. Some of them have been canceled. They have been putting the truth out there, and all of a sudden it's difficult. They lose their jobs in universities, they lose their jobs in newspapers, and even publishing books, and all these kind of things. But truth will win out in the end, and that's the good word. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.